Hello. Today we're going to be making Bane's glove and mask from the Batman comics. To make the pattern I need for the glove, I first start by wrapping my arm in tinfoil. Once my arm's wrapped in tinfoil, I start taking duct tape and I very carefully put it on, only doing one layer of tape so it's not too thick. This is a very common way to make patterns for yourself. Once I'm done, I draw a line and make registration marks and slowly cut it off. And I trim up the edges as needed. I then trace my pattern onto some 5mm foam, marking where my registration lines are so I know where to line everything up. I then very carefully extend out my pattern just a little bit on each side in order to make sure my wrist fits through properly. I cut my pattern out. And I use contact cement on both sides. Once the contact cement has gotten tacky and dried for a couple minutes, I begin gluing it together. With contact cement, as soon as it sticks to itself, it's very hard to get it unstuck, so you want to be very careful. Make sure you line up the registration lines for a clean seam. I test the glove to make sure it's a good fit. I Dremel the front of the glove to give it a nicer edge. I put on the glove that I'm going to be using, and I mark where I'm going to cut the knuckles out. After looking at it, I decide to make it just a little bit lower. I then put on the arm brace with the glove to make sure everything fits. I cut off the fingertips and do a test fit to see how it feels. I then draw a line on the glove so I know where to put the glue. I use contact cement on both the wrist and the glove. I then very carefully line everything up and start gluing the glove to the actual wrist. I make sure to put the sides of the glove onto the actual wrist in order to make sure everything sticks together properly. In order to make it light up, I use a light kit that I got from my local craft store. I take off the clip, and I draw out where exactly it's going to be on the glove. I trace it out again on another piece of 5mm foam in order to make the base of the injector. Once I have it drawn out, I cut out the base and I cut out where I traced out the light pattern in order to make it fit in. I then draw out where it's going to go on the actual wrist. Making lines where I need to cut a hole in the glove. I use an X-Acto knife to cut out a hole in the wrist so I have a place where I can slip the battery pack in. Once I have it all set up, I use contact cement and glue it onto the wrist. Making sure I line everything up and press it on once I have it all set. Next, I work on the sides of the case by taking some 10mm foam for the walls. I cut each side to the right height. Do a double check to make sure everything lines up properly. And draw where I'm going to be gluing it. To make the front of the case, I take some more 5mm foam. Once I have my lines drawn for the front of the case, I cut it out. I do the same thing for the back but with 10mm foam. Once I have all my parts cut out, I take some contact cement and glue all the walls together. I then glue it to the glove. And I do a test fit to see how it fits so far. I check and make sure the battery pack fits in properly. I then trace the top of the case onto some more 5mm foam for the top. I cut the top of the case out. And then I make lines to see where I need to drill a hole for the button to go through. I use my small Cos tool hole cutter to cut out the hole for the button, and I use it again to cut out the actual button itself. I then super glue the buttons together. And then super glue the actual button to the battery pack. I apply glue to the top of the case before finally lining everything up and gluing it together. I trace out the top of the case again and freehand a pattern for an upper raised panel line. Once I get it cut out, I scorch the word Venom onto the panel for more decorations, before finally gluing it onto the top. I cut out a hole in the back of the case for the lights to fit through. I want to add some more detail to the glove, so I take some thin strips of 5mm foam and glue one to the front of the glove and one on the back of the glove. I make sure everything's straight on the panel, and then I start working on the mask. Next, I work on the mask. I have a pattern already drawn out from a previous project, but the process to make it is basically the same as the wrist. I trace everything out on 5mm foam and then proceed to cut it out. Once I have all my parts cut, I start gluing everything together with contact cement. Typically when I build a mask, I like to glue each half of the mask separately. When I have both halves put together separately, I then glue them together. I use the table to make sure that all the seams are lined up and I have no raised edges anywhere. I then take some more aluminum foil and place it on the front of the mask in order to draw the details for the mask out. Once I have everything duct taped down, I start drawing out my pattern. I only need to draw out one side of the mask because I can flip it over and use it for the other side since everything is already symmetrical. I then cut everything out with an X-Acto knife. I trace it out into some 2mm foam and start cutting it out. I then realized I didn't account for the nose. So, I make some adjustments to the pattern, redraw everything out, and then cut it out again. And then I start gluing everything together with contact cement. Once everything's glued together, I then glue it onto the front of the mask. Make a small hole in the back of the mask where the tube goes. I take some foam clay and I wrap it around the tube I'll be using to connect the mask and glove. I do this to make a port that'll help glue the tube to the mask. Once I have the basic shape drawn out, I connect it to the mask just to help get the curve, and then I let it sit to dry. Foam clay typically takes about 2 days to dry. I then make marks on the back of the mask where I'm going to drill more holes. Once I have all the marks placed out, I start slowly drilling all the holes. I then take some polyurethane tubing and cut a small section out of it. I use some sandpaper to rough up the surface of it in order to make sure everything glues together properly. I then cut out some strips of open cell packing foam and I start wrapping it around the tube, supergluing it on every couple rotations. I check to make sure the lights are hard to see through the foam and everything looks good. The next thing I do is I start sealing the foam with my heat gun. Once everything's sealed, I take some quick seal to hide all the seams. Next, I Plastidip everything. After a few coats of Plastidip, I use Plaid FX's paint primer in order to prime everything for painting. I let the primer dry overnight and then I start painting the front of the mask. It takes a couple coats of white paint in order to cover up the black, and I apply this to both the front of the mask and all the details on the glove along with the case. Once everything's painted, I use window film for the lenses, and I just super glue it in. I then mix up some 5-minute epoxy and apply it to the end of the tube. I then glue in one end of the tube to the mask. Once the epoxy sets, I then take a white shoelace and weave it in and out of the holes I cut out earlier. I then cut the shoelaces down and then I super glue it onto the inside of the mask. Finally, I take some more 5-minute epoxy and glue the other end of the tube into the glove. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any suggestions on what I should make next, please leave them down in the comments below.